At 10:00 a.m. on May 2nd, 2025, a 911 call shattered the morning silence in Lansdowne Station, Nova Scotia. Two children, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, had vanished without a trace from their family home on Garlock Road. But what police discovered months later would change everything we thought we knew about this case. Have you ever lost sight of a child for even a few seconds? That heart-stopping panic that grips you when you turn around and they're just gone. Now imagine that feeling, but it never ends. And what if everything you were told about how they disappeared, every detail, every explanation, was a lie? The story you're about to hear isn't just another missing children case. It's a masterclass in how modern forensic science can expose secrets that were meant to stay buried forever. Secrets that the RCMP has been quietly uncovering for months. Secrets that suggest this wasn't just two innocent children wandering into the dense Nova Scotia woods. Today, we're exposing the bombshell findings that have turned this case upside down. We're talking about evidence that points to something far more sinister than anyone initially imagined. Evidence that suggests someone in that house knew exactly what happened to Lily and Jack, and it wasn't what they told police. But here's what makes this case truly terrifying. The red flags were there from day one. The inconsistencies, the strange details, the story that just didn't quite add up. And if you know what to look for, if you understand the warning signs we're about to reveal, you might just save a life. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn will change how you see this case forever. More importantly, it might change how you protect the children in your own life, because the truth about what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan is far more disturbing than their family ever wanted you to know. Before we dive into the shocking details, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. This case has more twists than a psychological thriller, and trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why the RCMP is treating this as something far more serious than a simple missing persons case. And if you're already feeling that chill down your spine, if something about this story is already making you uneasy, then you're starting to understand what investigators felt when they first heard the family's explanation for how these children disappeared. The sliding door story. That's where our investigation begins, and it's where everything starts to fall apart. Before we expose the secrets that have rocked this investigation, you need to understand who Lily and Jack Sullivan really were. Because these weren't just statistics in a missing persons file. They were real children with real personalities, real dreams, and real lives that were cut short on that devastating May morning. 6-year-old Lily Sullivan was the kind of child who lit up every room she entered. Her infectious laugh could be heard echoing through the dense woods surrounding their home as she played elaborate games of hide and seek with her little brother. She was protective, mature beyond her years, and had already shown signs of the strong, independent woman she was destined to become. Lily loved to read. Her favorite spot was the old wooden chair by the living room window, where she would spend hours lost in fairy tales and adventure stories. She had just learned to ride a bike without training wheels, and her stepfather Daniel Martel would later tell police that she had been excited about exploring the trails around their property. But here's something that becomes crucial to understanding this case. Lily was also cautious. Neighbors described her as the type of child who always asked permission before going anywhere. She would never wander off without telling an adult. Keep this in mind, because it becomes important when we examine the official story of how she and her brother disappeared. 4-year-old Jack was Lily's constant companion and her self-appointed shadow, with his mop of curly hair and gap-toothed grin. He was the kind of child who made friends wherever he went. Jack was curious about everything, constantly asking why and how about the world around him. He collected rocks and leaves, turning their rural home into a natural museum of childhood wonder. But Jack was also dependent on his sister. He rarely went anywhere without Lily by his side, and according to family friends, he had never shown any inclination to explore on his own. This detail becomes absolutely critical when we examine the timeline of their disappearance. The children lived with their biological mother, Malaya Brooks Murray, and their stepfather, Daniel Martel, in an isolated home on Garlock Road in Lansdowne Station. This wasn't suburban Nova Scotia, this was rural country, where the nearest neighbor was hundreds of yards away, and the dense woods seemed to swallow sound itself. The house sat on the edge of what locals called the deep woods. acres of dense forest filled with steep banks, thick brush, and terrain that could challenge even experienced hikers. It was beautiful, wild, and absolutely unforgiving to small children. This isolation is crucial to understanding both the appeal and the danger of their situation. On one hand, it provided a childhood filled with natural wonder and adventure. On the other hand, it created an environment where anything could happen without witnesses. The family dynamics were complex, as they often are in blended families. Malaya had been working to build a stable home for her children after previous relationships hadn't worked out. Daniel Martel had entered their lives as a stabilizing force, a man who seemed to genuinely care for the children and wanted to provide them with the security they deserved. But as we'll discover, the picture-perfect family life had cracks that weren't immediately visible to the outside world. And those cracks would become fault lines when investigators began digging deeper into what really happened on May 2nd. The children's daily routine was simple but structured. They would wake up, have breakfast, and often spend the morning playing in the backyard, while the adults took care of household tasks. The sliding door that led from the kitchen to the backyard was their gateway to adventure, a detail that would become the centerpiece at both the family's explanation and the RCMP's growing suspicions. Lily and Jack were well known in the small community. They attended local events, played with neighbor children when visiting, and had become familiar faces at the nearby grocery store where their mother shopped. Everyone who knew them described them as happy, well cared for children who showed no signs of distress or fear. But here's where the story gets its first uncomfortable twist. In the weeks leading up to their disappearance, some community members noticed changes in the family dynamic. Nothing dramatic, just small things that in retrospect seem more significant. A neighbor mentioned that the children seemed to be staying closer to home than usual. Another resident recalled seeing them playing in the backyard more often, but noticed they were quieter than normal. These observations might mean nothing, or they might be the first clues that something was building to a crisis. The night before they disappeared, Lily and Jack had a normal evening. They ate dinner, played games, and went to bed at their usual time. According to Daniel Martel's statement to police, they seemed happy and excited about the approaching weekend. But by 10 hours on AM the next morning, they were gone, and the explanation for how they disappeared would launch one of the most complex and controversial investigations in Nova Scotia's recent history. Understanding who these children were, their personalities, their habits, their relationships, is crucial to recognizing why the official story never made sense to investigators. Because when you know that Lily never wandered off without permission, and Jack never explored without his sister, the sliding door story becomes much more than just an explanation. It becomes a red flag that should have been impossible to ignore. May 2025 started like any other morning in the Sulivan household. The sun filtered through the kitchen windows of their Gallup Road home, casting long shadows across the wooden floors that Lily and Jack had walked across thousands of times before. But this morning would be different. This morning would be the last time anyone would see them alive. Daniel Martel later told police that he woke up around 7:30 AM to the sound of the children playing in their shared bedroom. This was normal. Lily and Jack were early risers who often entertained themselves with quiet games before the adults got up. He said he could hear Lily reading to Jack, her voice carrying down the hallway like it had so many mornings before. At approximately 8:00 AM, Daniel said he got up and began preparing breakfast while Malaya Brooks Murray, the children's mother, was still sleeping. He described the morning as peaceful and routine, exactly the kind of normal family scene that makes what happened next so shocking. According to Daniel's initial statement to police, he prepared cereal and toast for the children around 8:30 AM. He said they ate breakfast at the kitchen table, chattering about their plans for the day. The sliding door that led to the backyard was visible from the kitchen table, a detail that becomes crucial to understanding the timeline. Here's where the story takes its first suspicious turn. Daniel told investigators that after breakfast, around 9:00 AM, he went to the bathroom and then to the bedroom to check on Malaya. He estimated he was away from the kitchen for approximately 15 minutes. When he returned, he said the children were gone. But it's what he found, or claimed to find, that has haunted investigators for months. The sliding door was closed. Let me repeat that, because it's absolutely critical. Daniel Martel claimed that when he discovered the children were missing, The sliding door they had supposedly used to exit the house was closed. Not just closed, but closed so quietly that he hadn't heard it open or shut. Think about this for a moment. If you have children, or if you've ever been around children, you know that sliding doors are not quiet. They scrape, they rumble, they slam. The idea that two small children, one of them only 4 years old, could open a sliding door, exit through it, and close it behind them without making a sound is virtually impossible. But Daniel's story gets even more problematic when you examine the details. He told police that he immediately noticed the children weren't in the house and went to check the backyard. Finding no sign of them, he said he spent nearly an hour searching the property before calling 911. This means that according to his timeline, he discovered them missing around 9:15 a.m., but didn't call for help until 10 a.m. 45 minutes. In a missing children case, 45 minutes is an eternity. When pressed by investigators about this delay, Daniel explained that he wanted to be thorough in his search before bothering the police. He said he checked all the children's favorite hiding spots, walked the perimeter of the property, and even ventured into the edge of the woods calling their names. But here's what makes this explanation so troubling. Daniel was familiar with the terrain. He knew how dangerous the dense woods could be for small children. He knew that every minute counted if Lily and Jack had wandered into that unforgiving wilderness. So why would he wait 45 minutes to call for professional help? The 911 call itself provides another layer of mystery. Audio recordings reveal that Daniel sounded concerned, but not panicked. His voice was steady, his explanation was coherent, and he provided clear directions to the property. Some investigators later noted that his demeanor seemed inconsistent with a parent who had just discovered two small children missing in dangerous terrain. But the most damning detail of all was discovered when RCMP investigators began examining the sliding door itself. The door was clean, spotless, not a single fingerprint or smudge where small hands might have struggled to push it open. The door handle showed no signs of having been touched by children's hands, and the door frame, well, we'll get to those shocking discoveries later. When investigators questioned Daniel about the door's condition, he explained that he had cleaned it the night before as part of his regular household maintenance. He said he often wiped down the glass doors to keep them sparkling clean, but cleaning the door the night before the children's disappearance, that's what investigators call a suspicious coincidence. The weather that morning adds another layer to the mystery. It was cool and damp, with heavy dew covering the grass. If two children had walked across the backyard barefoot, or in socks, as Daniel claimed they might have done, there should have been clear footprints in the wet grass leading away from the house. There were no footprints. Search teams that arrived later that morning found no evidence that the children had passed through the backyard. No disturbed grass, no broken branches at child height, no signs of their passage toward the woods. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. But children don't vanish. They leave traces. They leave evidence. They leave some sign of their passing. The complete absence of any physical evidence that Lily and Jack had walked through their own backyard was the first major red flag for investigators. As the morning progressed and search teams began arriving, Daniel's story remained consistent but strange. He repeated the same details: the quiet sliding door, the clean exit, the mysterious disappearance without a trace. He was cooperative with investigators, answering questions and providing access to the property. But seasoned investigators know that sometimes it's not what people say that reveals the truth, it's what they don't say. And what Daniel Martel didn't say in those first crucial hours would become just as important as his official story. He didn't mention that the door had been difficult to open lately. He didn't mention any unusual sounds during the night. He didn't mention seeing any strangers in the area. He didn't mention any concerns about the children's safety. Most importantly, he didn't mention the microfractures that investigators would later discover on the door frame. Microfractures that would change everything we thought we knew about how Lily and Jack Sulivan really disappeared. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt something was off about a situation, but couldn't quite put your finger on what it was? Because that's exactly what investigators were experiencing as they listened to Daniel's account of that morning. The sliding door story was neat, clean, and simple. But missing children cases are never neat, clean, or simple. And as the RCMP would soon discover, The truth about what happened on Garlock Road was far more complex and disturbing than anyone initially imagined. Within minutes of receiving the 911 call, the RCMP activated what would become one of the largest search operations in Nova Scotia's recent history. The Missing Persons Unit immediately dispatched teams to the Sulivan property, understanding that in cases involving missing children, every second counts. The initial response was swift and comprehensive. Ground teams, canine units and aerial assets including drones and helicopters were deployed to cover the vast wilderness surrounding the family home. The terrain presented an immediate challenge: dense woods, steep banks and thick brush that could hide evidence or, tragically, small bodies. But what made this search operation truly extraordinary was the community response. Word spread quickly through the small towns and rural communities of Pictou County, and volunteers began arriving at the Sulivan property in numbers that surprised even veteran investigators. Within 48 hours, more than 100 volunteers had joined the search effort. These weren't just curious onlookers. These were parents, grandparents, and community members who understood that Lily and Jack could have been their own children. They brought local knowledge of the terrain, extra eyes to scan the wilderness, and a determination that energized the entire operation. The search grid was methodical and extensive. Teams divided the wilderness into sectors, with each area being searched systematically by both ground teams and aerial units. The dense canopy of trees made aerial observation challenging, but thermal imaging equipment was deployed to detect any heat signatures that might indicate the children were still alive. What made this search particularly complex was the geography of the area. The Sulivan property bordered on what locals called the deep woods. Thousands of acres of forest that stretched for miles in every direction. This wasn't a neighborhood park where lost children might be found quickly. This was wilderness that could swallow adult hikers, let alone two small children. The weather became both an ally and an enemy in the search efforts. The cool, damp conditions meant that if the children were still alive, they would be dealing with hypothermia risks. But the moisture also preserved potential evidence and made tracking easier in muddy areas. Search teams focused on water sources, streams, ponds, and marshy areas where thirsty children might have traveled. They checked every fallen log that might provide shelter, every dense thicket where frightened children might have hidden. The methodical nature of the search was both necessary and heartbreaking. But as the hours stretched into days, the search revealed something troubling. There was no evidence that Lily and Jack had ever entered the woods. No broken branches at child height. No fabric caught on thorns, no footprints in the soft earth near the tree line, no disturbed undergrowth where small bodies might have pushed through. The complete absence of any trail was beginning to worry investigators. On May 3rd, the search operation expanded to include specialized dive teams, who checked every body of water within a reasonable walking distance of the Sulivan home. Ponds were drained, streams were carefully searched, and even old wells were examined. The thoroughness of the search was both inspiring and desperate. The Nova Scotia government's announcement of a $150,000 reward for information leading to the children's safe return brought a new dimension to the case. Suddenly, the search wasn't just local, it was provincial, then national, then international, as the story spread through news networks and social media. The reward announcement also brought something unexpected: a flood of tips and potential sightings. The RCMP established a dedicated tip line, and within days, they had received 88 pieces of information from the public. Each tip had to be investigated, verified, and catalogued, a massive undertaking that required additional personnel and resources. Some tips seemed promising. Reports of children, matching Lily and Jack's descriptions, were called in from communities as far as Halifax and Moncton. Each report triggered immediate investigations, but all proved to be false alarms. The children remained missing. Other tips were more troubling. Several callers reported seeing unusual activity in the area around the Sulivan home in the days leading up to the disappearance. Strangers who didn't belong in the rural community, vehicles parked in unusual locations, individuals who seemed to be watching the property. These reports were particularly concerning because they suggested that the disappearance might not have been as spontaneous as the sliding door story implied. If someone had been watching the family, planning and preparing, then this case was something far more sinister than children wandering into the woods. The search operation revealed something else troubling. The isolation of the Sulivan property worked against the investigation. In a suburban neighborhood, dozens of security cameras might have captured the children's movements. Neighbors might have seen them playing in their yard. But on Gareloch Road, surrounded by dense woods, the family had lived in a bubble of privacy that made finding witnesses nearly impossible. By May 4th, weather conditions began to deteriorate. Heavy rain that would continue through May 6th made ground searches dangerous and aerial operations impossible. The thermal imaging equipment that had been crucial for detecting heat signatures became less effective as the temperature dropped and visibility decreased. The rain also presented another challenge. It was washing away evidence. Any footprints, scent trails or physical evidence that might have survived the first few days was being erased by the downpour. Search teams watched helplessly as their chances of finding crucial evidence literally washed away. But the community didn't give up. Volunteers continued arriving, despite the weather, organizing themselves into search parties that combed every accessible area. Local businesses donated food, coffee, and supplies. Churches opened their doors as coordination centers. The search for Lily and Jack became a rallying point for the entire region. The emotional toll on the search teams was enormous. Many of the volunteers were parents themselves, and the thought of two small children lost in the wilderness drove them to push beyond exhaustion. Professional search and rescue teams worked around the clock, driven by the possibility that the children might still be alive somewhere in the vast wilderness. But as the days passed, hope began to fade. The rain continued, temperatures dropped, and the chances of survival in the wilderness diminished with each passing hour. Search teams began to acknowledge the grim reality that they might be looking for bodies rather than living children. On May 7th, the RCMP made the difficult decision to scale back the active search operation. The decision was based on weather conditions, the lack of evidence that the children had entered the woods, and the growing suspicion that this case was more complex than initially believed. The announcement was devastating for the community. Volunteers who had dedicated days to the search effort felt like they were abandoning Lily and Jack. Families who had maintained hope for nearly a week suddenly faced the reality that the children might never be found. But the RCMP's decision to scale back the search wasn't about giving up, it was about refocusing their efforts. Because by May 7th, investigators had begun to suspect that the answer to what happened to Lily and Jack Sulivan wasn't hidden in the dense woods of Nova Scotia. It was hidden in the details of Daniel Martel's story about the sliding door. The search operation had been massive, comprehensive and thorough. It had mobilized hundreds of people, utilized cutting-edge technology, and covered thousands of acres of wilderness. But it had also revealed something crucial. There was no evidence that Lily and Jack had ever left their backyard, and that discovery would launch the RCMP into a completely different type of investigation, one that would uncover secrets that someone had been desperately trying to hide. While search teams combed the wilderness for any trace of Lily and Jack, RCMP investigators were conducting a parallel investigation that would prove far more revealing than anyone initially imagined. What began as a routine missing persons case was evolving into something much more complex and disturbing. The investigation team, led by experienced detectives from the RCMP's Major Crimes Unit, understood that the lack of evidence in the woods meant they needed to look elsewhere for answers. They began with the most logical starting point, the people who had last seen the children alive. Over the course of several weeks, investigators conducted extensive interviews with 54 individuals connected to the case. This wasn't just a casual questioning process. These were formal, recorded interviews that sometimes lasted for hours. The interview list included family members, neighbors, friends, service providers, and anyone who had any contact with the Sulivan family in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. Each interview was carefully structured to gather not just facts, but also impressions, observations, and details that might seem insignificant individually, but could form a pattern when examined collectively. Investigators were looking for inconsistencies, unusual behaviors, or any information that might contradict the official story of how the children disappeared. The interviews revealed a complex web of relationships and tensions that hadn't been immediately apparent. While the Sulivan family had appeared stable from the outside, there were underlying issues that became more obvious under careful scrutiny. Several neighbors mentioned that they had noticed changes in the family dynamic in the weeks before the disappearance. Daniel Martel, who who had previously been described as an engaged and caring stepfather, seemed more stressed and withdrawn. The children, who had been regular fixtures in the community, were seen less frequently in public places. But it was the interviews with closer family members that provided the most troubling insights. Without violating confidentiality, investigators began to piece together a picture of a household under pressure. Financial stress, relationship tensions, and concerns about the children's future were all factors that painted a more complicated picture than the happy family narrative. One of the most significant developments in the investigation was the decision to administer polygraph tests to key individuals in the case. While polygraph results are not admissible in Canadian courts, they serve as valuable investigative tools that can guide further inquiry and help identify areas where additional scrutiny is needed. Daniel Martel's polygraph examination became a crucial turning point in the investigation. The test, conducted by an experienced polygraph examiner, focused on his account of the morning the children disappeared. The results were significant enough to warrant further investigation into his statements. Polygraph tests measure physiological responses to questions: heart rate, blood pressure, breathing patterns, and skin conductivity. While these measurements can't definitively prove deception, they can indicate when a person is experiencing stress or anxiety while answering specific questions. During Daniel's examination, certain responses raised red flags for investigators. His physiological reactions to questions about the sliding door, the timing of his discovery of the missing children, and his activities during the crucial time period showed patterns consistent with deception or extreme stress. But polygraph results alone don't make a case. They simply provide direction for further investigation, and that's exactly what the RCMP did. They began digging deeper into every aspect of Daniel's story, looking for evidence that could either support or contradict the polygraph findings. The 48 tips that had poured in from the public provided another crucial avenue of investigation. Each tip was carefully catalogued, cross-referenced, and investigated. While many proved to be false alarms or mistaken identities, some provided valuable insights into activities around the Sulivan property in the days before the disappearance. Multiple witnesses reported seeing unfamiliar vehicles in the area. Some described individuals who seemed to be watching the property or behaving in ways that struck them as suspicious. These reports were particularly troubling because they suggested that the disappearance might have been planned rather than spontaneous. The digital forensics component of the investigation was equally comprehensive. In modern missing persons cases, investigators routinely examine cell phone records, social media activity, internet searches, and other digital footprints that might provide clues about the case. Daniel Martel's phone records revealed interesting patterns. His call history, text messages, and internet searches in the days leading up to the disappearance showed activities that were difficult to reconcile with his role as a concerned stepfather. While the specific details remained confidential, sources close to the investigation described the digital evidence as concerning. Social media analysis revealed another layer of complexity. The family's online presence in the weeks before the disappearance showed signs of stress and tension that hadn't been apparent in their public interactions. Posts became less frequent, interactions with friends and family decreased, and the tone of their communications changed subtly but noticeably. Credit card and financial records provided another piece of the puzzle. Investigators discovered transactions that seemed inconsistent with the family's normal spending patterns, purchases that couldn't be easily explained. Unusual cash withdrawals, financial activities that suggested someone was preparing for a significant change in their circumstances. The investigation also revealed the complexity of the family's living situation. While Daniel Martel had been presented as a stable, caring stepfather, the reality was more complicated. His relationship with Malaya Brooks Murray had been turbulent, marked by periods of separation and reconciliation. His relationship with the children, while generally positive, had experienced some strain as the family dealt with various pressures. One of the most revealing aspects of the investigation was the examination of the family's daily routines and habits. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the children's typical activities, their usual bedtimes and wake-up times, their favorite foods, and their behavioral patterns. This detailed analysis revealed something crucial. The children's behavior on the morning of their disappearance was inconsistent with their established patterns. Lily, who was habitually cautious and always asked permission before going anywhere, would never have left the house without telling an adult. Jack, who was dependent on his sister and rarely ventured anywhere alone, would never have initiated an outdoor adventure without supervision. The behavioral analysis also revealed that the children had never shown any tendency to explore the woods surrounding their home. Despite living in a rural area with easy access to wilderness, they had always preferred to play in the backyard or immediate vicinity of the house. The idea that they would suddenly decide to venture into the deep woods was inconsistent with their established behavior patterns. This investigation shows how modern technology and methodical police work can uncover truth. But are you ready for what they found? Comment below with your theory before we reveal the shocking discoveries that have turned this case upside down. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that the sliding door story was just the beginning of a much more complex and disturbing narrative. The RCMP had uncovered evidence that suggested the disappearance of Lily and Jack Sulivan was not what it appeared to be. But the most shocking discoveries were yet to come. Because while investigators were interviewing witnesses and analyzing digital evidence, forensic specialists were conducting their own examination of the physical evidence from the Sulivan property, and what they found would change everything we thought we knew about this case. After months of painstaking investigation, the RCMP's forensic team made discoveries that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of the Sulivan case. What they found wasn't just evidence. It was proof that the sliding door story was built on a foundation of lies. The breakthrough came when forensic specialists decided to conduct a comprehensive re-examination of the sliding door itself. What they discovered hidden in the door frame would expose secrets that someone had been desperately trying to conceal. Using advanced microscopic analysis techniques, forensic experts identified microfractures in the door frame that were completely inconsistent with normal wear and tear. These weren't the kind of hairline cracks that develop over time from regular use. These were stress fractures that indicated the door had been subjected to sudden, intense pressure. But it was the pattern of these fractures that made them truly significant. The microfractures were concentrated in specific areas of the frame, areas that suggested the door had been forced open from the outside, not gently opened by small children from the inside. Think about the implications of this discovery. If the door had been forced open from the outside, it meant that someone had broken into the Sulivan home. Someone had gained access to the house while the family was inside. Someone had been there when the children disappeared. The forensic analysis went even deeper. Using 3D imaging technology, investigators were able to create detailed maps of the fracture patterns. The images revealed that the damage was fresh, consistent with having occurred on or around the date of the children's disappearance, not weeks or months earlier. But the most damning evidence came from the analysis of the fracture edges themselves. Under high-powered microscopic examination, the fractures showed characteristics that indicated they had been caused by a specific type of tool, likely a pry bar or similar implement designed to force open doors and windows. This discovery completely contradicted Daniel Martel's story about the children quietly opening the door and walking out into the backyard. The physical evidence proved that the door had been forcibly opened by someone using tools specifically designed for breaking and entering. The forensic team didn't stop there. They conducted a comprehensive reanalysis of all the physical evidence collected from the scene, looking for details that might have been overlooked in the initial investigation, when everyone believed they were dealing with missing children who had wandered into the woods. The fabric fibers that had been found near the sliding door underwent advanced testing that revealed they didn't match any clothing belonging to Lily or Jack. Instead, they matched materials commonly found in work clothes and outdoor gear, the type of clothing that might be worn by someone conducting surveillance or preparing for a criminal act. DNA analysis of trace materials found on the doorframe revealed the presence of genetic material that didn't belong to any member of the Sulivan family. While the DNA samples were too degraded to provide a definitive match, they confirmed that an unknown individual had been in contact with the doorframe around the time of the children's disappearance. But perhaps the most significant discovery was the reanalysis of the footprint evidence. Using advanced 3D imaging and gait analysis technology, investigators were able to create detailed maps of the impressions found in the soft earth around the Sulivan property. The analysis revealed something shocking. There were adult footprints leading to and from the house that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. These weren't the footprints of searchers or investigators. They were impressions that had been made before the search teams arrived. The footprint analysis also revealed the complete absence of any impressions that could have been made by Lily and Jack. If the children had walked across the dewy grass in the backyard, their footprints should have been clearly visible in the soft earth. The fact that no such impressions existed was powerful evidence that the children had never left the house under their own power. The re-examination of the sliding door also revealed something that had been missed in the initial investigation. Traces of a substance that appeared to be adhesive residue. This residue was found on the door handle and frame, suggesting that someone had used tape or similar material to muffle the sound of the door opening. This discovery was particularly significant because it addressed one of the most problematic aspects of Daniel Martel's story, his claim that the children had opened and closed the sliding door without making any sound. The presence of adhesive residue suggested that someone had indeed silenced the door, but it wasn't the children who had done it. The forensic revelations extended beyond the physical evidence at the scene. Analysis of Daniel Martel's clothing from the morning of the disappearance revealed trace evidence that was inconsistent with his account of his activities. Soil samples from his shoes didn't match the composition of the earth in the areas where he claimed to have searched for the children. Instead, they matched soil found in a different part of the property, an area that wasn't part of the official search grid, but was accessible by vehicle. The clothing analysis also revealed the presence of vegetation and debris that suggested Daniel had been in areas of dense undergrowth and difficult terrain. This was inconsistent with his claim that he had conducted only a cursory search of the immediate property before calling 911. But the most disturbing discovery came from the analysis of the family's digital devices. Computer forensics revealed that someone had attempted to delete internet search history from the household computers in the days following the children's disappearance. The deleted searches included queries about police investigative procedures, evidence disposal methods, and legal penalties for various crimes. While it's possible that these searches were conducted out of curiosity about the ongoing investigation, their existence raised serious questions about the motivations behind the deletions. The digital forensics also revealed that Daniel Martel had been in contact with individuals who weren't part of the family's normal social circle. Phone calls and text messages to unknown numbers in the days before and after the disappearance suggested communications that he hadn't disclosed to investigators. Perhaps most significantly, the forensic re-examination revealed evidence that the Sulivan home had been cleaned extensively after the children's disappearance. Chemical analysis detected the presence of industrial-strength cleaning products that had been used to scrub surfaces throughout the house. This level of cleaning was far beyond normal household maintenance. It was the kind of thorough, systematic cleaning that suggested someone was trying to eliminate evidence of a crime. The cumulative effect of these forensic discoveries was overwhelming. The physical evidence painted a picture of a carefully planned and executed crime, not a spontaneous disappearance of two children wandering into the woods. The micro-fractures in the doorframe proved that someone had forced their way into the house. The fabric fibers and DNA evidence confirmed that an unknown individual had been present. The footprint analysis showed that the children had never left the backyard. The adhesive residue explained how the door had been silenced. The soil samples contradicted Daniel's account of his search efforts. The digital evidence suggested attempts to conceal information, and the cleaning evidence indicated a systematic effort to eliminate traces of criminal activity. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of these discoveries was what they suggested about the timing of the crime. The evidence indicated that the break-in and the children's disappearance had occurred while the family was in the house, possibly while they were sleeping. This meant that Lily and Jack Sulivan hadn't wandered into the woods and become lost. They had been taken from their home by someone who had planned the crime in advance, executed it with precision, and then attempted to cover their tracks by creating a false narrative about the children's disappearance. The sliding door story wasn't just wrong, it was a deliberate lie designed to conceal the truth about what had happened to two innocent children. And as investigators began to piece together the full scope of the evidence, they realized that the person who had created this elaborate deception was someone who had been trusted with the children's safety and well-being, someone who had been living in the same house where the crime was committed. Someone who had intimate knowledge of the family's routines and vulnerabilities. Someone who had access to the children at their most vulnerable moments. The RCMP's new findings had exposed the truth about the Sulivan case. But they had also revealed something far more disturbing. The enemy had been hiding in plain sight all along. The forensic evidence uncovered by the RCMP paints a picture so disturbing that it challenges everything we thought we knew about the Sulivan case. When expert analysts examined the microfractures, DNA evidence and other physical clues, they weren't just solving a puzzle, they were exposing a carefully orchestrated deception that had been designed to hide the truth about what happened to Lily and Jack. Let's break down what the evidence actually tells us, because understanding these details could help you recognize danger signs in your own life. The microfractures in the sliding door frame are not just random damage, they're a roadmap of criminal activity. Forensic experts who specialize in tool mark analysis can determine not just that a door was forced open, but how it was done, what type of tool was used, and approximately how much force was applied. In this case, the fracture patterns indicate that someone with knowledge of breaking and entering techniques used a pry bar or similar tool to force the door open from the outside. The pressure was applied at specific points designed to minimize noise while maximizing leverage. This wasn't a panic smash and grab, but a calculated entry by someone who knew what they were doing. But here's what makes this evidence truly chilling. The fractures show that the door was forced open and then carefully closed again. This suggests that the intruder wanted to conceal their method of entry, creating the illusion that the door had been opened normally from the inside. The DNA evidence adds another layer of disturbing truth. The genetic material found on the doorframe doesn't match any member of the Sulivan family, but it does match samples found in other areas of the property. This means that the unknown individual didn't just break into the house, they had been on the property before, possibly conducting surveillance or preparing for the crime. The fact that this DNA was found in multiple locations suggests that the intruder had spent considerable time around the Sulivan home. They weren't just passing through, they were familiar with the property, the family's routines, and the layout of the house. The footprint analysis reveals perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the evidence. The complete absence of any impressions that could have been made by Lily and Jack tells us that these children never had a chance to run, never had an opportunity to escape, never even made it out of the house under their own power. The gait analysis of the adult footprints found around the property shows something equally disturbing. Two different individuals were involved in the crime. The impressions show different boot sizes, different walking patterns, and different weight distributions. This wasn't a lone perpetrator, it was a coordinated effort involving multiple people. The soil analysis from Daniel Martel's shoes reveals that his story about searching for the children was partially true, but not in the way he described. He had indeed been in areas of dense undergrowth and difficult terrain, but not in the locations where he claimed to have searched. Instead, the soil samples match an area of the property that's accessible by vehicle, but hidden from view of the house. This suggests that Daniel was involved in activities related to the crime, but not in the way investigators initially suspected. Rather than being the primary perpetrator, the evidence suggests he may have been cleaning up after the crime, disposing of evidence, or preparing the false narrative about the children's disappearance. The adhesive residue found on the doorframe explains how the intruders were able to open and close the sliding door without making noise. By applying tape or similar material to the door tracks and frame, they could muffle the sound of the door moving, a technique commonly used by experienced burglars and kidnappers. This level of preparation indicates that the crime was planned well in advance. The perpetrators had studied the house, identified the sliding door as their point of entry, and brought the materials necessary to execute a silent break-in. The digital evidence, the deleted internet searches, the unknown phone contacts, the attempts to conceal communications suggest that someone in the house was either involved in planning the crime or was aware of it after the fact. The searches about police procedures and evidence disposal are particularly damning because they show consciousness of guilt and an active effort to stay ahead of the investigation. But the most disturbing aspect of the evidence is what it reveals about the systematic nature of the crime. The extensive cleaning of the house with industrial-strength chemicals wasn't just an attempt to maintain hygiene, it was a deliberate effort to eliminate forensic evidence. This type of cleaning requires knowledge of what types of evidence investigators look for and how to eliminate them. It suggests that someone involved in the crime had experience with criminal activity or had researched extensively how to conceal evidence. When we put all of this evidence together, a clear picture emerges. Lily and Jack Sulivan were not lost children who wandered into the woods. They were victims of a carefully planned kidnapping that was carried out by individuals who had studied the family, prepared for the crime, and executed it with precision. The crime involved multiple perpetrators who had intimate knowledge of the family's routines and vulnerabilities. They gained access to the house during the night or early morning hours, when the family was most vulnerable. The children were taken from their home and transported to a location that was accessible by vehicle but hidden from view. The perpetrators then returned to the house to stage the scene and create the false narrative about the children's disappearance. Daniel Martel's role in the crime appears to be complex. The evidence suggests he wasn't the primary perpetrator, but he was involved in the cover-up and may have been coerced or manipulated into participating. The 45-minute delay between discovering the children missing and calling 911 now makes sense in this context. Daniel wasn't searching for lost children. He was either waiting for instructions from the actual perpetrators or was using the time to complete the staging of the crime scene. The forensic evidence also suggests that this wasn't a crime of opportunity. The level of planning, the sophisticated entry techniques, and the systematic cover-up indicate that the perpetrators had been watching the Sulivan family for an extended period. This raises the terrifying possibility that Lily and Jack weren't random victims. They were specifically targeted by individuals who had studied their routines, identified their vulnerabilities, and planned their abduction with military precision. The implications of this evidence are staggering. If the RCMP's forensic analysis is correct, then the Sulivan case isn't just a missing persons case. It's a kidnapping that was disguised as a disappearance. And if Lily and Jack were taken by organized criminals who had planned their crimes so meticulously, then the chances of finding them alive become much more complex. Professional kidnappers don't typically leave loose ends, and they don't usually return their victims. But the evidence also provides hope. The forensic discoveries have given investigators concrete leads to follow. The DNA evidence could lead to matches in criminal databases. The footprint analysis could identify suspects. The digital evidence could reveal the network of individuals involved in the crime. Most importantly, the evidence has exposed the truth about what happened to Lily and Jack Sulivan. And sometimes, the truth is the first step toward justice. The Sulivan case isn't just a tragic story about missing children. It's a masterclass in recognizing danger signs, understanding criminal behavior, and protecting the people we love. The lessons from this case could literally save lives, including your own. Let's start with the most important lesson. Trust your instincts when something doesn't feel right. From the very beginning, the sliding door story felt wrong to investigators. A door that opens silently, children who disappear without a trace, a 45-minute delay in calling for help. These details individually might seem insignificant, but together they created a pattern that experienced investigators recognized as suspicious. This principle applies to every aspect of our lives. Whether you're evaluating a babysitter, assessing a romantic partner, or dealing with someone who has access to your children, pay attention to the details that don't add up. When someone's story has inconsistencies, when their behavior doesn't match their words, when explanations seem too convenient, these are red flags that deserve serious attention. The second critical lesson is understanding how predators operate in blended families and complex living situations. The Sulivan case reveals how criminals can exploit the vulnerabilities that exist in blended families. Step-parents, boyfriends, and other individuals who gain access to children through romantic relationships with their parents often have intimate knowledge of family routines, access to homes, and the trust of both parents and children. This doesn't mean you should be suspicious of everyone who enters your family's life, but it does mean you should be aware of the unique vulnerabilities that exist in these situations. Background checks, gradual introduction of new partners to children, and maintaining strong communication with your children about any adults who make them uncomfortable are all essential protective measures. The third lesson is about recognizing the signs of criminal planning and surveillance. The evidence in the Sulivan case suggests that the perpetrators had been watching the family for an extended period before the crime. They knew the family's routines, the layout of the house, and the best time to execute their plan. In your own life, be aware of signs that someone might be conducting surveillance on your family. Unfamiliar vehicles parked in your neighborhood, strangers who seem to be paying unusual attention to your home or your children's activities, or individuals who ask probing questions about your family's schedule could all be indicators of criminal planning. The fourth lesson is understanding how modern criminals attempt to cover their tracks. The systematic cleaning of the Sulivan house, the deletion of internet search history, and the careful staging of the crime scene show how sophisticated criminals attempt to eliminate evidence and create false narratives. This knowledge can help you recognize when someone is trying to conceal their activities. Unusual cleaning behavior, attempts to control narratives about events, or efforts to limit access to information could all be signs that someone is hiding criminal activity. The fifth lesson is about the importance of community vigilance and communication. The Sulivan case was ultimately solved because investigators didn't accept the initial story and because community members provided crucial information that helped piece together the truth. The 48 tips from the public, the neighbors who reported suspicious activity, and the volunteers who searched tirelessly all contributed to exposing the truth. In your own community, don't be afraid to report suspicious activity to authorities. If something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. The information you provide could be the key piece of evidence that prevents a crime or solves a case. The sixth lesson is about protecting children through education and communication. While Lily and Jack Sulivan were taken from their home and probably never had a chance to escape, many child abduction cases involve situations where children could protect themselves if they knew what to do. Teach your children about personal safety, including how to recognize dangerous situations, how to attract attention if they're in trouble, and how to communicate with trusted adults about anything that makes them uncomfortable. The seventh lesson is about the importance of documentation and evidence preservation. The forensic evidence that ultimately exposed the truth in the Sulivan case was preserved because investigators followed proper procedures for evidence collection and analysis. In your own life, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you suspect criminal activity, document everything you can and preserve any evidence that might be relevant. The eighth lesson is about understanding the psychology of criminal behavior. The Sulivan case shows how criminals can appear normal, even caring, while planning and executing horrific crimes. Daniel Martel was described as a loving stepfather, but the evidence suggests he was involved in a conspiracy to harm the children he was supposed to protect. This teaches us that criminal behavior doesn't always look like what we expect. Predators can be charming, helpful, and seemingly trustworthy. They can hold positions of authority and responsibility. They can be people we know and trust. The ninth lesson is about the importance of supporting law enforcement investigations. The RCMP's ability to solve this case depended on their access to advanced forensic technology, their collaboration with multiple agencies, and their persistence in following evidence even when it contradicted the initial assumptions. As citizens, we can support these efforts by providing information when requested, respecting the integrity of ongoing investigations, and understanding that complex cases take time to solve properly. The 10th and most important lesson is about never giving up hope for justice. The Sulivan case shows that even when criminals think they've created the perfect cover-up, forensic science and determined investigators can expose the truth. The microfractures in the doorframe, the DNA evidence, the digital footprints, these pieces of evidence were always there, waiting to be discovered by investigators who refuse to accept the obvious explanation. This gives us hope that other missing persons cases can be solved, that other families can find closure, and that criminals who think they've gotten away with their crimes can still be brought to justice. But perhaps the most important takeaway from the Sulivan case is this: the enemy isn't always a stranger lurking in the shadows. Sometimes the greatest danger comes from people who have been invited into our homes, who have gained our trust, and who have access to our most vulnerable moments. The sliding door in the Sulivan case wasn't just a physical barrier that was breached. It was a metaphor for the trust that was violated, the safety that was shattered, and the innocence that was destroyed. If this case has taught you something important about protecting children or recognizing danger signs, please share this video and subscribe for more true crime content that could save lives. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need to hear these crucial lessons. Because knowledge is power, awareness is protection, and sometimes understanding the truth about how criminals operate is the difference between becoming a victim and staying safe. As we reach the end of this investigation into the Sulivan case, we're left with more questions than answers, but also with crucial knowledge that could protect other families from experiencing this same tragedy. The RCMP's forensic revelations have exposed the truth about what happened to Lily and Jack Sulivan. This wasn't a case of children wandering into the woods and getting lost. This was a carefully planned kidnapping that was disguised as a disappearance, executed by individuals who had gained intimate access to the family's life and vulnerabilities. The microfractures in the sliding doorframe, the DNA evidence from an unknown intruder, the complete absence of any footprints from the children, the systematic cleaning of the house. All of this evidence points to a crime that was planned in advance and covered up with precision. But the most disturbing aspect of this case isn't just the crime itself, it's how easily it could have been prevented if the warning signs had been recognized and acted upon. As of today, the RCMP investigation remains active. The forensic evidence has provided new leads, new suspects, and new avenues for investigation. While I can't share all the details of the ongoing investigation, I can tell you that the evidence we've discussed represents only a portion of what investigators have discovered. The case has also sparked important conversations about child safety, family dynamics, and the vulnerabilities that exist in blended families and complex living situations. Child protection agencies across Canada are using the Sulivan case as a training example for identifying high-risk situations and intervening before tragedies occur. The community of Lansdowne Station and the broader Pictou County region has been forever changed by this case. The innocence of small-town life has been shattered by the knowledge that evil can hide behind familiar faces and trusted relationships. But the community has also shown remarkable resilience. The volunteers who searched tirelessly for Lily and Jack, the neighbors who provided crucial information to investigators, and the families who have supported the Sulivan family through this ordeal. They all demonstrate the power of community solidarity in the face of unthinkable tragedy. The $150,000 reward, offered by the Nova Scotia government, remains active. If you have any information about this case, no matter how insignificant it might seem, please contact the RCMP immediately. Your information could be the key that finally brings justice for Lily and Jack Sulivan. For those of you who have been following this case, who have shared information on social media, who have kept these children in your thoughts and prayers, your support has been crucial to keeping this case in the public eye and maintaining pressure on investigators to find the truth. The Sulivan case also highlights the importance of supporting organizations that work to protect children and prevent crimes like this from occurring. Child protection agencies, victim support services, and law enforcement organizations all rely on public support to carry out their crucial work. But perhaps the most important message from this case is directed at parents and caregivers. Trust your instincts, be aware of warning signs, and never assume that danger only comes from strangers. The statistics are sobering. The vast majority of crimes against children are committed by someone known to the family. Step-parents, boyfriends, relatives, family friends, and other trusted individuals account for the majority of child abduction and abuse cases. This doesn't mean you should be suspicious of everyone who enters your family's life. But it does mean you should be vigilant about protecting your children and aware of the warning signs that indicate someone might pose a threat. The Sulivan case shows us that even when criminals think they've created the perfect cover-up, the truth has a way of emerging. Forensic science, determined investigators, and community support can expose even the most carefully planned crimes. As we continue to follow this case, we're reminded that justice isn't always swift, but it can be thorough. The RCMP's investigation has shown that even months after a crime is committed, new evidence can emerge that changes everything we thought we knew about what happened. For Lily and Jack Sulivan, the search for justice continues. While we may never know exactly what happened to them in their final moments, we can honor their memory by learning from their case and working to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. The sliding door that was supposed to protect them became the symbol of their vulnerability, but their story and the investigation that has exposed the truth about their disappearance has become a powerful tool for education awareness and protection. If you've learned something from this case, if these revelations have opened your eyes to dangers you hadn't considered before, if this investigation has made you more vigilant about protecting the children in your life, then Lily and Jack's story will have served a purpose beyond the tragedy of their disappearance. Please share this video with others who need to hear these important lessons. Subscribe to our channel for more true crime content that goes beyond entertainment to provide real value and potentially life-saving information. Comment below with your thoughts about this case, your theories about what happened, or your own experiences with recognizing and avoiding dangerous situations. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need to hear these crucial messages. Most importantly, if you're in a situation where you're concerned about the safety of a child, don't hesitate to contact local authorities or child protection services. It's better to be wrong about your suspicions than to remain silent and allow a tragedy to occur. The truth about Lily and Jack Sullivan's disappearance has finally been exposed. The secrets that someone tried so hard to hide have been brought to light through the dedication of investigators, the power of forensic science, and the support of a community that refused to give up. But the search for justice continues. And as long as there are families who need protection, investigators who need support, and communities that need to stay vigilant, we'll continue to share these important stories. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. Thank you for caring about Lily and Jack Sullivan, and thank you for helping to spread awareness that could prevent other families from experiencing this same heartbreak. The sliding door may have been breached, but the truth will always find a way to emerge. And sometimes, that truth is the most powerful weapon we have in the fight against those who would harm innocent children. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never forget that knowledge is the first line of defense against those who would exploit our trust and threaten our most vulnerable family members.